Welcome to Whiskey Gaming, and this is my light review of The Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver Remastered. I played it on the PS5, it's also available on the PS4, Xbox One, Xbox Series, PC, and Nintendo Switch. So let's start with the story. You play as Raziel. He is one of Kain's lieutenants, and as the game opens up, he explains that the older vampires get, the more they change and evolve, etc. And his evolution was growing wings, which made Kain very jealous, and he ripped the bones out of his wings and threw Raziel into an abyss of swirling water, which killed Raziel. Raziel, however, was brought back to life in the spirit realm. He is sent on a quest of essentially revenge to kill his former brothers, as well as his creator, Kain. But nothing is that simple, obviously, and there's a lovely twist at the very end, and then kind of a twist somewhere in the middle that's not really much of a twist, just kind of a, ooh, surprise! Now that all being said, I really like the story, I like the narration, I like Raziel's narration, and I think it fits with the Legacy of Kain series. I know technically I'm playing these out of the order that they were released in, but I am playing them in chronological order. But if you go back to Blood Omen, Kain did a whole lot of narration there, so it makes sense playing Soul Reaver that Raziel does a lot of narration there. Let's get into the audio, and the voiceover work I think is well done. It absolutely fits with the story thus far and what we've heard and the overall, what I would consider at the time, higher quality voiceover. And it actually still holds up pretty well today. There aren't really audio changes from the original to this. It's the same lines. As far as I can tell, it is the exact same audio, just really cleaned up. And then you have the music, which is good, and it's ominous, and it's foreboding, and it fits very well with the world and the game and everything like that. It's not a soundtrack I would ever buy. It's not that kind of music. As for the sound effects, I think the sound effects work very well. This is still coming from a PS1 game, and it feels like the sound effects have not evolved from that. It doesn't sound like they've created new ones or added new ones, so they are very much outdated, but they do work. Now let's get into the gameplay mechanics and whatnot, and this is a third-person action game with puzzles, which includes the boss fights. The boss fights are generally solved via puzzles rather than direct combat. But Raziel comes back, and one of his unique abilities is that he can switch between the two realms, the living realm and the dead realm, spirit realm, whatever you want to call it. So if you're dying, if you're getting your ass beat and you die, you actually go into the spirit realm where you can recover and come back, which I think is cool. But one thing they do to limit that is they don't allow you to come back in that one spot. There are only certain areas where you can. So I thought that was a well done and clever idea. One thing that is kind of difficult is that Raziel can't just straight up kill the vampire enemies. He needs either a weapon or a stake or something with fire. Not really a stake, it's a torch. But he has to be able to like impale them on something, set them on fire, use a weapon, etc. And there's not a ton of weapons. They're found around the world, but it's not like they're always readily available. And the longer he is in the regular world, he begins to degrade unless he is absorbing souls. Until he gets a spectral form of the Soul Reaver sword, at which point, as long as you keep him fully fed, he has the sword when he's in the real world. Which that thing is very useful and also gets used in solving puzzles because it gains some abilities that you can use there. But it's with him 100% of the time when he's in the spectral realm, no matter his status, health status, there we go. And I think actually one thing that they do, I know I'm kind of a little all over the place, is when you switch between the realms, you can use that during the puzzles. There are some puzzles where you can't make a jump in the normal world, but you can make it in the spirit world, so you switch between the two as needed to complete puzzles. Which another thing that allows him to complete puzzles and explore is every time he defeats a boss, he gains an ability, like the ability to pass through not solid walls, or doors, but like gates with bars and whatnot. He can pass through that. He can start climbing walls using his claws. He can swim, etc. But then you can also find glyphs, which will give you special abilities like a water blast since vampires are weak to water. You can find elemental forges for the Soul Reaver to give them elemental abilities. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, I did not go and hunt all of these down. I got a few here or there. I love the fire forge for the sword because you can just light your enemies on fire and all vampires seem to be weak to fire. Now that being said, I don't think the combat had a lot of depth to it. I think the puzzles had more depth to them, and the boss fights being puzzles had more depth to them than any of the actual combat. But let's get on to the controls, and this is one of the weaker elements in my opinion, because the controls don't feel like they've grown much. This feels like a remaster of the Dreamcast version where you had camera control, and that's nice, but at times the camera does get stuck in weird ways, which is unpleasant, but at least you have some control over it. But not just that, like the controls don't have the same precision as a modern game, so it doesn't feel like they went in and cleaned up those elements when they were remastering the game. And I also had responsiveness issues. There were times where I was pressing the button to jump and the game was like, no, I don't feel like doing that. Or other things. There were also times where the camera felt like it had its own mind, so that was kind of a responsiveness issue there. Just in general, they could have been more responsive. There were definitely times where I was pressing the button and the game just wasn't reading it. As for the imprecision, its movement, its camera, and while it works well enough, it could be better. I think that's just the controls in general. So now we're gonna move on to the graphics and visuals, and this is where it gets weird for me. They clearly redid the textures. They look so much better than a PS1 or Dreamcast game, and they definitely up-resed the entire game. And the cool thing about all of that is it really shows off the design and art style that was present, but was left up to the imagination more than anything in the original versions. But you can see all of his muscle tissue since his skin's been stripped away. You can see all the detail in Kain. You can see just a lot more detail in general in basically everything, because they've really done a lot to add textures that just didn't exist and they didn't have the ability to add once upon a time. And that applies to everything. The world around you looks far better than it ever did before. You see so much texture. Stone looks more like stone, the streets, the bricks, the everything. It all has just so much more texture and looks so much better. Unfortunately, there's also some things that they just didn't go the distance on, and that's disappointing. Specifically, one of the huge things is animation. All the animation is still the exact same as from the PS1 game, and it looks horrible, and it just looks weird and awkward because you have this game that visually looks far better, but all the movement is just awful. It's just jerky, it's weird, it's unnatural, it looks like it's built on, really old, bad animation, and it just doesn't feel like they went the full distance remastering it. It feels somewhere between this awkward mix of like HD re-release and remaster. There's other things that they didn't go the full distance with, like draw distance. There's a dark shadow, like the fog of war in old games, just won't render that far, and you're like, well, why aren't we doing that? This is coming out on a PS5, Xbox One, PS4, like much more powerful consoles, and we're still getting this shitty draw distance. Why? But then I had this weird glitch where as I continued to play, the game got darker and darker, and it wasn't until another glitch occurred that I had to restart my game and everything went back to the proper colors. Which I will say, I do love the use of colors in this game. I think they did an awesome job switching between the spirit realm and the regular realm and just making them feel very different, which is also just a really cool design element beyond just colors. Because the spirit realm, the proportions of things change completely and it makes it feel weird and foreign even though you were just in the same space. So I think that's actually a really cool thing. Another place where I feel like the graphics didn't go the full way is some of the special effects. Whether it's the blood when you're killing an enemy or the way the spirits look, that stuff all still looks like it's straight off of a GameCube. Like they didn't redesign it, put more detail into it, put more effort into those things. Which is really unfortunate because they clearly put effort into everything else and making these things that you saw once upon a time on the PS1 or GameCube look just so much better, and they filled in the gaps of the imagination. Again, I'm kind of all over the place, but I am a little disappointed visually with this game because I just didn't feel like they went as far as they needed to make it a proper remaster. Now, as I mentioned, I did have a glitch, which was I jumped off of a thing and just got suspended above the water. It was after I had the ability to swim, so it was just weird. I was stuck and I couldn't move. So I had to quit out the game and then jump back in, which is what unfucked my color issue with everything getting darker. But let's get into the wrap up. And I love that this game exists because it allows me to go back and replay it, and it's a great thing for archiving essentially. And it allows me to replay a story that I've really enjoyed because I've always liked the Legacy of Kain series and I've always wanted more of it, or at least the ability to go back and replay them easily. Unfortunately, this just doesn't feel like they went the full distance in remastering it. It feels like it's somewhere between an HD re-release and a remaster. They definitely stepped up some of the visual stuff, but they didn't clean up a lot of the other things that I think really go into fully remastering a game. As it stands, I enjoyed it, and if you're a fan of the series, it's totally worth playing, but if this is your first foray in, it's kind of rough. I am going to reserve my full judgment until I've played Soul Reaver 2 so that I can, say whether the bundle is fully worth it or not. But as it stands, I'm glad that it exists, I appreciate that it exists, but I am disappointed in the final product that they released of Soul Reaver 1. Okay, so in the comments down below, why don't you tell me, what's your definition of remastering a game? To me, it's fixing the controls, it's redoing the visuals, maybe even from the ground up, but not messing with the story or anything like that. As always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button, and if you like what I'm doing in general, share and subscribe. Have a good one.